Thanks, Eric. All right, well, we will do introductions in just a moment, but why don't we dig in? Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. My name is Gretchen Sullivan, and I am joined by my colleague, Lori Collins, as well as our colleague, Darcy Simon. We are with an organization called the American Institutes for Research. We were formerly with a company called Mayer and Mayer that merged with AIR at the very beginning of this year. And we are working on this project with Washington state and local partners through an effort funded by the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices to provide support for this project in a couple of different ways. And we're really, really thrilled to be here with you today. We can move on to the next slide, Lori. All right, there's just our recording notification so that you all have that there. Thanks for starting that, Eric. And we can move on to the next slide. All right, well, we did want to spend just a couple of minutes doing some introductions, thanking you all for being here, and giving folks who are joining us for the first time today an opportunity to say hello and introduce themselves. So if you move on to slide 4 in the Jamboard, and I should say, you can follow along on the screen here during our meeting. Sometimes it's easier to read if you're following along in the Jamboard in your browser window. So I will do my best to remind you where we are in the Jamboard itself and which slide we're on. Let me move on over myself there. As I said, I'm joined by my colleagues, Lori and Darcy. And I think to get us started, why don't I first, Eric, turn this over to you and Eleni and Joe to say hello, and then we can continue with introductions.
Sure. All right. Well, I'll go first then. Good morning, everybody. Eric Wolf, Deputy Director at the State Workforce Board. Just thanks again for continuing to stay engaged in this process as we're moving out of the legislative session finally, and our attention begins to refocus. I'm really quite excited about today's meeting, most especially because our friends from AIR have put a ton of work between meeting 1 and meeting 2 into some draft tools for you all to consider and give some feedback on. As we've gone through this project, initially we were thinking about creating sort of one tool that would help participants come in and give an asset-based interview intake process that would allow folks to kind of quantify the experiences, skills, and also aspirations that they bring into the education and training process, regardless of what partner they end up initially engaging with. And that's kind of evolved, I think, into a suite of tools instead of one explicit tool. You'll see 3 of them today. The first tool is a self-sufficiency matrix that we think could be helpful, especially for frontline case managers, to help participants assess where they are at in the self-sufficiency continuum upon their first interaction. The second is a tool for frontline staff to help participants go through a motivational interview process and really help solidify and quantify what exactly they're hoping to achieve for themselves and their family through this education training experience. And then finally, a third tool, which I think is still has a bit of a ways to go in development, is a tool for the participants themselves to have in their backpack personally, that they can take to different partners throughout our workforce system and help jumpstart the intake process and conversation without necessarily starting at square one about their goals and about the skills and educational history and experiences that they bring into the system. So that is how the vision has kind of evolved over the last month. We did have an opportunity to give an overview at an NGA meeting across all of our peer states. For those who are unaware, this really came out of a multi-state affinity group and learning group that the NGA convenes. It's grown in the past 2.5 years to almost 20 states out of 50 that are all working on, in some cases, very different projects to increase capacity in their workforce systems across the nation. We had an opportunity last week to present what Washington was doing. If you missed that, we did send out a link in our orientation email for this meeting, and I would definitely commend that to you, as I think it goes into a really in-depth overview on the project. I'll stop there. Eleni or Joe, would you like to add in anything else in terms of level setting?
No, I think you did a good job. I think the only other thing I'd add is we obviously welcome everybody's input into this, and the closer to the front line we can get to gather that input, the better. And eventually, we hope to do some piloting of this with our participants in the program. And that's going to really help us understand whether or not we're getting even close in our goals. So we need all of you to help us get there. So thanks a bunch. Joe?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Joe Wilcox. I'm with the Workforce Board, helping support this project and the development of the tool, or I guess it's more of a morphing into more of a multi-tool or toolkit at this point as we go. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion and getting people's input onto how this is going to morph and move into a tool that we'll be able to pilot. So looking forward to it, and thanks all for being here.
Great, thank you. Thanks all. And we do want to spend a couple of minutes. I see a few of you have put new stickies in the Jamboard introducing yourself. Thanks for doing that. And if you haven't done that yet, please do feel free to navigate over to slide 4 in the link that we put in the chat, and you can do that. But why don't we just do quick intros before we move into a little bit more about the project and the work that we'll be doing together before we move forward. So I am just going to start at the top of my list of participants. And Alexis, I am going to start with you. If you could say hello. Alexis, it looks like you might be on mute.
Sorry, I just got all back from vacation, so I'm a little I don't know if I'm ready. I'm not ready. I'm not sure if I'm ready yet. So, but anywho, again, I'm Alexis Clough. I'm with Department of Services for the Blind, DSB, here in our Tacoma office, and I was asked to be part of the little group here to talk about, what sounds like a really great tool for agencies to use. So I'm pretty excited.
Wonderful. We're thrilled to have you with us. Thank you so much. All right, Anna, I'll turn next to you.
Good morning. Anna Nikolaeva, Workforce Education at the State Board. I'm the new policy associate in Workforce Ed team. Mostly familiar faces here, but those who don't know me, I'm a returner to the State Board after I spent about 4 years at Employment Security, working in workforce initiatives and on Career Connect Washington projects. Glad to be here.
Wonderful, thanks.
Meeting with this group.
Wonderful, thanks, Anna, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, let me go next to Damiana, forgive me if I mispronounced your name.
Hello, it's Damiana, thank you. Damiana Harper with Department of Services for the Blind, joining for the first time along with Alexis, and I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you for having me. I am having a little bit of trouble with the accessibility of this Jamboard, so I haven't put anything in it yet, but I will continue to try to figure it out.
Thank you for letting us know that. And why don't we commit to following up with you and any others to make sure that that is not an issue moving forward. Welcome, thank you. All right, let me turn next to Louisa Erickson.
Good morning. It's Louisa Erickson, and I'm with Department of Social and Health Services with Economic Services Administration, and serve as Workforce Development Programs and Policy Administrator, as well as our state lead for WIOA. And I did not attend the first meeting as I was out of office, so I'm really excited to join. And also, I'm having difficulty with accessing the Jamboard as well, just to let you know.
Okay. let's see here. Is there anything that we can do right here in the moment that could make that a little bit easier for anyone?
Could you repost the link in the chat, maybe?
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that obviously we will be having, verbal discussion throughout today. And as Eric said, we're recording this. So certainly we want your feedback anyway. You would like to provide it. So we'll make sure that everybody has a chance to chime in there. Let me just post this here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I will say I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but there's going to be time after today's meeting, a little over a week, for you all to provide feedback on the documents that have been referenced. And so this is not your only opportunity today. These will be evolving as we move forward. All right, Marie, can I turn next to you?
Absolutely, as soon as I find my mute button. My name is Marie Bruin. I'm Director of Workforce Education at the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges.
Wonderful. Welcome. Thanks, Marie. And Michael, I'll turn next to you.
Everyone, Michael McKillop. I'm Acting Executive Director for Department of Services for the Blind, and Damiana and Alexis, thank you for joining, my colleagues from DSB. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Michael. Nicole.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the Policy Associate at the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges in the Basic Education Department. So glad to be back with you all today.
Thanks for joining us again. And Terry, I'll turn next to you.
Good morning, everyone. Terry Redman, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Director. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. And Will.
Good morning, everyone. Will Durden, Director of Basic Education for Adults with the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. Nice to be here today.
Wonderful. Great, thank you. Did I miss anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to say hello? Okay, great. Well, we're so happy that you all are here. We're really glad to have some additional representation on this team and are really excited for the work that we can do together. So thanks so much for taking the time. And just to echo, Eleni's comments, we really do appreciate the addition of some staff who have some frontline perspective. We think that's essential to this work. So thanks so much for joining us. And Lori, we can move on to slide 5. All right. So Eric and Eleni and Joe really did touch on this a little bit at the outset of our conversation today, but I did want to give the three of you an opportunity if there was anything else that you wanted to add around the vision for this work that you haven't had an opportunity to chime in on yet. Okay, I'm not hearing from all of you, so we'll move forward then to our next slide, because we want to talk just a little bit about the project and the timeline and the work that we're anticipating over the next several months. So really our objectives and deliverables for this project, for those of you who are new to this working team, is to develop and finalize content for a common customer counseling and planning tool. And as Eric and others have said, this is kind of morphed into more of a toolkit. So we've got a couple of tools that we have been working on and we'll be reviewing with you today. We have also been working on a charter for the partners that are part of this work that really outlines the overall process around tool development and piloting. We'll take a quick look at that today as well, and we'll give you an opportunity to provide any feedback. And then as we move forward into our next 2 meetings, this is our second of 4, we will be working to develop a strategy for piloting the tools with customers. And then finally, we will be putting together a final deliverable for the National Government Association Center for Best Practices. And so we'll be working with you on that as well over the course of our work together. Okay, Laura, you can move ahead to the next slide. So just in terms of our journey as we've gone through these meetings, as we started to go through them. So in January, we met for the first time, and we were really focused on looking at the draft project charter and beginning really some interesting brainstorming work on development of content for the tools. We will go back to the charter today. We're hoping to get that in as final shape as we can today, but really focus our time together today on looking at these 3 tools and getting your feedback on them now and as a follow-up to this meeting. Our March meeting, we will refine the tools and again, start pilot strategy development. And then in our final meeting in April, we will finalize that pilot strategy and also work together on our final project deliverable for NGA. And in between each of these meetings, we are asking folks to do a little bit of work in terms of comments, feedback, reviewing things, just so that we can keep things moving for you and have fresh drafts for you at every meeting. All right, so in terms of our norms, in the interest of time, I'm not going to run through each of these individually, but we did some initial brainstorming around kind of key norms or principles that will be guiding our work together. And so things like keeping customers at the center of this work, contributing actively during our meetings and in between, taking kind of an improv-based yes and approach, so really trying to build off the ideas of others. So these are just some norms that we have put together as a group so far. We added at our last meeting a focus on ensuring accessibility, which clearly is really important. And we also added a focus on ensuring cultural competency and diversity, equity, and inclusion in our work together and in the tools that we develop. But we did want to just share these with you briefly and see if there was anything off the top of your heads that you would like to add as norms for our group, and we will get those reflected in the charter for you. Okay, well, if anything does come up as we move through the discussion today, please do feel free to add it to the Jamboard there on slide 8, or we will add it as a follow-up to our notes following this meeting. So we can move on to slide 9. So here's really where we're going to focus today. We'd like to revisit the project charter and see if there's anything else that we would like to add to it at this point. Certainly we can continue to refine that over time, but we're hoping to have it in pretty good shape by the end of our time together today. But we will be spending the bulk of our work really focused on the draft tools that have been developed, giving you an opportunity to provide feedback here today, as well as a follow-up to this meeting. And then before we wrap up, we will talk a little bit about homework before the March meeting, and meeting scheduling. So those are really our objectives for today. I want to pause before we move into the charter discussion to see if anyone has any questions, comments, things that they want to share with the group before we kind of roll up our sleeves and dig into the work a bit. Okay. Well, certainly as we go throughout our time together today, should any questions arise, please do raise them. We had some really good discussion around some questions that came up in the first meeting, and we welcome your questions and comments. So before we turn to the project charter, just to set this conversation up, and Lori, you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So the charter, again, is a draft that we developed really to describe the project, to talk about the partners that are part of this work, to talk about the roles, and it also includes some discussion around our timeline and the key phases. We at AIR will be involved in this project with you all through May/June. That's when our time under the NGA work wraps up, but then it is envisioned, as the charter outlines, that the piloting phase would start after that. So the overall charter covers the general timeframe of 2022. We did make some updates, and Lori can screen share the charter here in a minute, but we did make some updates based on your feedback at the last meeting, including that this tool in the pilot at this point is targeted to adult customers, although we envisioned that it could and would be expanded to young adult customers at a later time. We updated the list of team partners. We added some pieces to the shared vision. And let's see, we also added some additional, we added our norms so that those are outlined in the charter. So for those of you that have had a chance to take a look at the charter prior to the meeting today, we did want to see if folks had any feedback that they would like to share or questions around the charter. And Lori, if you'd like to screen share it, you certainly can. Thank you. And again, this is a document that if you have additional feedback following the meeting today, you're welcome to provide that over email and we'll reflect it. Yeah, and we've kept it in track changes so you can see the updates that we're making over time with you. So this really, just as a setup for if you want to take a look at it after the meeting today, it really does lay out the overall project vision, the partners, the norms, and then this key activities, et cetera, section really outlines the overall timeline, the deliverables for each part of the timeline, the roles that partners will be playing in each stage of the process. And so just trying to, sort of get everybody on the same page about the work that's being done and the timeline that we'll be working on. Okay. Well, again, as with the other pieces, we are sharing lots of things with you today. So certainly once you've had a chance to digest things, we'll be looking for your feedback following the meeting today. Okay. So then why don't we move forward and really dig into the tools themselves and the conversation that we're hoping to have with you today. And if you're following along in the Jamboard, I'm now looking at slide 13. And so we just wanted to set up our work with you today to talk a little bit about the resources that have been drafted to date. They are indeed all drafts at this point, and we're looking to improve and refine them with you over our next couple of meetings. But the first piece that we have put together, and I think is helpful in terms of just talking about the three tools and how they interrelate, is a resource piece for staff that will be using the tools. And the resource piece is really designed to explain what each of the tools is and how staff can be using them together in their work with customers. And so, as I believe Eric referenced at the beginning, the three tools that we are looking at is a self-sufficiency matrix assessment tool. And Lori and I will talk a little bit more about that, but that's really to get a sense of where folks are on a self-sufficiency continuum from, whether they're really in crisis and struggling with certain areas or whether they're thriving in certain areas. And that looks across a number of different life domains, not just workforce, education, or career related. So that's a key piece that we've been working on and we're excited to share with you. We also, really one of the key drivers of this work is wanting to take a strength and asset-based approach to work with customers. And so we have drafted a strengths-based discussion questions tool that staff can use in their conversations with customers. And, it might be an initial conversation. Some of the questions might be more follow-up questions for later conversations, but questions in a number of areas, life, family, work, goals, people's values, their vision for their future. And we'll take a look at each one of these tools in turn. But really trying to come at interactions with customers from the perspective of elucidating their strengths, their assets, as opposed to focusing just on barriers and gaps, and then how we can translate that really into kind of a portfolio for customers that highlights those strengths and assets. And that is the third tool that we'll be taking a look at with you today, is really a first draft of this customer strengths portfolio tool. Again, that's looking across a number of different life domains. and areas that we really want to highlight for staff. And as Eric mentioned earlier, I think this one, this really is a first draft. It probably needs a little bit more work. And I think as an internal team, we have been talking about how to better tie together that strengths-based model that's in the discussion questions tool within the actual portfolio tool itself. And so we can talk more about that today and your ideas related to that. But that really is an overview of the three pieces that the team has been working on: the matrix assessment, the discussion questions, and then this draft of the portfolio tool itself, as well as number one here, the staff resource that describes each of them and how they can be used in a complementary way with one another. So that is where we'll be focusing the most of the rest of our time together today. Before we dig in, let me ask if there are any questions around these tools or how they fit together, or any more background that we could provide that would be useful before we look at each of them.
Thank you, Gretchen. I have a quick question. So is this tool envisioned to be something that you all will do virtually and the information will be shareable?
That is a great question, Nicole. Eric, were you about to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I can take at least a swing at the pitch, Nicole. Initially, we're looking to keep it mostly paper-based and figure out a way to make it virtual and do data sharing during the pilot phase and beyond. But for this meeting, and I think for the next couple of meetings together, we're really mostly focused on just designing the tool itself for the time being, probably in a physical paper way. Of course, one thing that we really do need to consider, and Michael jogged my brain the second that I saw his hand go up, is to the extent we create paper tools, we do need to consider a way to make it accessible for screen readers. So there will likely be some sort of virtual version of this tool available for folks who are blind and low vision, who may need some other electronically assisted way of accessing it. Michael?
Michael, I'm really pleased that my hand has that power, Eric, over you. So that's awesome. One of the questions I'll be having is, I see that matrix, the self-sufficiency matrix, and that's kind of a snapshot in time. And we're trying to develop a tool that's going to be something that they take with them and they don't have to repeat themselves. So how do those two relate? That'll be the question I'll have as we're talking about those tools. So they seem at odds.
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. And Laura, you might be really well positioned to chime in, but I think in our initial thinking around the matrix tool is that might be something you do as a snapshot in time, but that also gets revisited over time to see how people are doing and if they're improving in terms of, as a result of services and resources and making progress toward their self-sufficiency goals. So I think we sort of see those working in tandem, and that is I think the discussion questions, the self-sufficiency tool, and the portfolio tool in some ways will need to be living documents that are constantly kind of in development, or living tools. I don't know, Lori, how would you add to that, improve that?
I don't know that I can. I think at this point, Gretchen, the answer you gave is where our thinking had been thus far, Michael, but obviously this is all free to be changed and different things, but it would be that the self-sufficiency matrix would be done initially, and then it would be done at regular intervals, definitely with the things that a person was in crisis or vulnerable around, because the idea would be that that's where barrier reduction strategies are being developed. So there would need to be a regular check-in on that. And then definitely at the point that services are exited or ended, or whatever the wording is that says this is the beginning, but then this is the end of services, you would definitely want to do that snapshot again to show progress. So that's where we were thinking, but I don't know. Does that answer your question?
think probably we'll need to have more conversation around how they.
Absolutely. For sure.
For sure. Yeah. And I think as this has evolved, has evolved sort of from one tool to more of a kit of tools, honestly, we don't have the answers on that entirely. Obviously, we're trying to figure out how are these things most helpful to staff and to customers and most mutually supportive, and certainly open to anything that we need to do along the way to make sure that they can be. That's a great question. Thanks, Michael. Other questions? I see we have something in the chat. Thanks for your question, Marie. Can we provide additional detail on where and how the data sharing piece is being visualized? I don't know, Eric, if you want to say a little more on that.
I don't really have anything more to share on that at this stage, Marie, because that's another question that we're still working out, how we're going to accomplish data share among partners. One of the tools, though, is really meant to live with the participant. And to be frank, that's another sort of distribution avenue that we need to talk about as well, because giving a participant, say, like a physical copy of a document, then necessarily expecting them to carry that with them to every customer interaction with our system, that's something we'll need to walk through. One thing that we've talked about is perhaps we could secure funding for small USB drives or something for participants that would carry this information from place to place. But we haven't really hit the stage yet where we've figured out where this is ultimately going to live in a virtual sense, or where case managers might be able to log in and access information dynamically on participants. It's really more of a participant side thing at the moment. One opportunity that I think is a much more medium to long-term opportunity for this tool is our system is in the process, very beginning stages of redesigning and relaunching a customer record management system that at least is the backbone for 2 of our WIOA titles. We might be able to find some sort of synergy there in terms of creating a space, say, in case notes for a tool like this, but that's still very much the front end of that process.
Thanks, Eric. And Anna, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Perhaps that it's already been discussed, so forgive me. So this says that these are the tools that are in development. So it's then we are developing these tools from scratch. Is that correct? And have we looked at, I just, for the heck of it, Googled, self-sufficiency matrix, and, hundreds of similar tools came up. So what sets the work that we're doing aside from, tools that already exist? When I was a career counselor at a community college, we used self-sufficiency assessments that were available in an online tool. So what is the value add of this work? And I'm sorry if we already covered this background.
I'll give a start, and no, we haven't already covered that. So that's a great question. And even if we had, I think it's good to circle back around and talk about that. So you're right. The self-sufficiency matrix is something that wasn't developed entirely from scratch. There were pieces and parts pulled from existing work that we were able to find, but we added to those things based on to make it more not just workforce focused. What we found was that the self-sufficiency matrix were typically very nuanced to targeted populations. You may find a self-sufficiency matrix for youth or for another targeted population, and those things were great and wonderful. We wanted to provide one that gave a broader snapshot, and that was definitely asset based. And so most of the matrix that you can just Google and find, a lot of them are asset based, but a lot of them weren't. So we tried to pull from the ones that we saw were, and then tried to also if you think about an individual person, what are all of the different things that impact that person? So one thing that you'll see on this matrix that we didn't see on others was try to expand and think about what are some of the family dynamics that may be at play for that person. So we may want to ask about an individual customer's health and their access to health care, but if they have dependents in their home that rely on them, what about the needs of that person? Because that will have an impact on the customer's ability to become self-sufficient. So we took concepts like that and expanded those to try to get at a more holistic approach. So that's the one tool of what you're going to see today that we built off of existing work in some other spaces, but then the other tools have been made from scratch.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to say thanks again, Damiana and Michael, for your comments, because yeah, these are definitely areas that are in our heads and we've been talking about, and I think we're going to have to continue to kind of work through these moving forward. As we look at the tools, specifically the customer strengths portfolio tool, there's nothing in there now that that relates to PII, but I think this is something that we're going to have to sort of talk more about and figure out as we move forward with these, for sure. Great questions and comments. Any others folks want to raise before we take a closer look at these pieces? Okay. Well, if this makes sense, because I do want to give us as much time as possible for discussion, why don't we take a real quick look at the staff resource piece, just so that we can share with you, what we're trying to do here. What this staff resource piece, which really talks about what the tools are and how they can be used together, is intended to do is to support staff in using these. And this content will certainly change over time as we work on refining and improving the tools themselves. So we don't have to spend, I don't think, a ton of time on it today. But what we did want to do is put together a piece that really talks about each of the three tools and how they can be used together. And so that's what Lori is sharing right now. And I think what we're trying to do is to say, number one, here's what this tool is. For example, the strengths-based discussion tool is to support your conversations with customers to help focus on these areas that are real assets for them, and really draw out things that are important to them or things that they're proud of or great experiences that they've had. And that customers' responses, for example, to the questions in this tool should also be reflected in the customer strengths portfolio tool. So this staff resource is really, just meant to say, here's how you can use these three pieces together, and here's how they are connected. And we do think that it will necessarily evolve over time as we continue to refine the tools over time. So that's really just kind of a piece that ties everything together. And we did want to see if anyone had any comments on this piece. We do have room on our Jamboard for each of these pieces. And I'm looking now at slide 14 for folks to provide comments or raise questions. I think a key question for us is probably just, number one, is a resource like this for staff that are going to be using the tools helpful? We think that it is, but we want to make sure that it is. And we also wanted to see, does anybody have, anything that they would want to add in terms of what a tool that would be kind of this resource for staff would provide? Is there anything else that you feel like we need to be sharing with staff, things that you want to make sure that we're communicating about the three tools and how they should be used?
Can you remind me who your target staff is who will be utilizing this again, please?
Sure thing, Nicole. Eric, oh, sorry, and Eric, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to take that?
Well, it's unrelated to Nicole's question. I can take it, as we're primarily thinking that it will be frontline staff that are responsible for accomplishing intake into the system, but it could be really any frontline staff across any of the titles in our system that could find that the tool useful. If not to accomplish intake, just to start the conversation at the front end of the education and training process. The reason I raised my hand, though, is I did also want to let people know we would love and value as much feedback as you're able to give us today, but you will also have an opportunity coming out of this meeting to provide feedback via track changes. And we will coalesce all that together into one document. We'll likely have a follow-up with all of you about how we've integrated some of that before our next meeting. So if you have thoughts that are kind of, germinating right now and you want to share them after the meeting, please know that there will be an avenue to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, and it's a lot. I feel like it's a lot to digest. And I know that these are lots of words, and it's a couple different documents. So absolutely, we want you to have an opportunity to provide feedback once you have had a chance to digest. Nicole, thanks for your question. Okay, Damiana, would it be appropriate for these tools to be shared with external contractors like CRPs?
I absolutely think it would be. I think that'd be very, very powerful, and it would help create that feeling of a standard, no wrong doors approach for the system, Damiana. Thanks for that.
Great question. Okay. Well, then why don't we, like I said, I just wanted to sort of give a brief overview of what we're trying to do with this resource piece that ties them together. Why don't we next spend a little bit of time looking at and talking through the self-sufficiency matrix assessment tool. You all have already raised some good questions and points around this piece, which we are taking note of, but we would like to get your sense of, if you've had an opportunity to review that, any immediate feedback that comes to mind. Do you see anything missing that we're not including, that we need to be including, as well as any other recommendations that you might have? And I think, just for Lori, if you do want to screen share it, certainly we can do that. If you all want to be in the Jamboard posting stickies with any thoughts, we're looking at slide 15.
Do you want me to share it, or?
Sure,
okay.
Sure. And then maybe we can just go through some highlights of some of the key areas that it's looking to include.
You got it. So I'll just talk through this just a little bit. It is a very large document, I realize that. We will have time to clean up formatting and all of that as we go further into the development of it. The tool is divided into 5 categories that would a customer would be assessed based on these 5, and then a 6th optional or supplemental category. I think supplemental is probably the better word, if they are in a household that has people of whatever age that rely on them for anything. Then we would add the family/household experience category. Again, and Michael, thanks to your question, it's envisioned that this be administered initially and then administered at various points beyond that. So it's not a one and done sort of thing. Each of the life domains.
Lori, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we got a note in the chat if we can expand the view at all, so that it's a little bit easier to read. And also, Eric, just if y'all didn't see it in the chat, Eric said it might be easier for you all to access and see the tools from the email that Joe sent last week. So I just wanted to highlight that too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for that. So is that bigger on the screen? I apologize. So then just 5 categories for each life domain. If a person is in crisis, a score of a 1, number 2, vulnerable, 3 is stable, 4 is self-sufficient, and 5 is thriving. We would envision that for any life domain where they have a score, they identify with a score of 1 or a 2, that there would be barrier reduction strategies put in place. And then it's possible that for a score of a 3, there may need to be barrier reduction activities put in place. I think that one's a little more of a judgment call based on the caseworker and whatever information is presented. And then 4s and 5s definitely should be reflected in their asset portfolio in whatever way that happens. And so again, all of these things are asset based, and we hope that that comes across in how we've presented it. But if it doesn't, be sure and let us know. So just to orient you to the document, life domains are listed in this first column. And then going across the top, the columns are 1 in crisis, 2 vulnerable, 3 stable, 4 self-sufficient, and 5 is thriving. And then there are statements related to each. If it's envisioned that a caseworker would complete this assessment with the customer. It's not envisioned that the document would just be given to the customer and said, fill this out. It should be sort of an interview type approach, and that they arrive at the answers together, and that the caseworker is having a conversation, and it's not necessarily just a question and answer interview approach, but it sets up for a conversation. The last thing, and then I'll hush and see if you all have any questions or comments. There are, as I was looking through this and I was thinking, well, how would I answer this particular column, or this particular life domain? There's going to be times where a person is between 2 of them and they aren't real sure. And so the guidance would be select the one that is most complete. So if on education, for example, if I'm currently in college and I'm working towards a degree or a certificate, we wouldn't want to say that I'm a 3. We would want to go with I'm a 2, because that's the highest, most accurate, or most complete. So I have a GED or a high school diploma, but I'm working on it. And then maybe in 6 months down the road, when the matrix is completed again, maybe I've moved from a 2 to a 3 because I've completed my training or what have you. Just that may have not been the best example to give, but that would be the idea. So different categories. So workforce, financial, supportive resources, things that are needed in order for them to go to work, go to school, become self-sufficient, whatever it is they're trying to do, just all around things. Health and well-being, so their overall physical and mental health. We tried to capture these things here, as well as their access to healthcare and their use of alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. In the next column is essential skills and traits. We really tried to build out what you see in this category really came from our first meeting. Things that those of you who were able to attend the first meeting that you all said were assets that we wanted to be able to identify and highlight for people. So we put all of those together and came out with these categories. So there are some things that are skills, and then there are some things that just aren't really skills, but just tend to be traits or characteristics of people. And so we really tried to capture that here. I thought this was really good discussion we had at that first meeting. So organization and planning, resiliency and grit, persistence, willingness or ability to ask for help, patience, empathy, survival, flexibility, and agility. Like those are just really great things. Then the last one, and I apologize for the big gap. This is the family household experience. So wanted to ask about, are they responsible for any kind of dependent care, whether giving it or arranging it? Are there healthcare needs of those dependents in their care? How much are those dependents, be it children or elderly adults or adults with a disability that rely upon the customer for activities of daily living? Just what is that whole experience, and do they have the supports that they need and that their family members need? And so I think that's the final category. So any thoughts or questions or comments? Sure, Michael, go ahead.
Back, but no hands went up. One of the challenges I think that we will need to tackle is there's so many different systems and so many different things in place already that gets part or some or all of this information and how those align. It's going to be a real challenge to impose an extra layer of work on stuff that they're already doing. And so how can we merge them with what they're already doing is going to be a big question. And while this one is a lot, it's voluminous, and going through that, certainly I think at intake, most people are probably going through some of this information. The strengths, when we get to that, that's a lot of work. And if we can talk about who's doing that work and how that's getting done in our heads, imagining, because I think frontline, that's going to be a really hard sell to add this unless we can really talk about the value of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, you're right. If the value add isn't immediately there, isn't seen, I think you're right. So do you, in your experience or in your knowledge, are caseworkers, and we use that title generically, knowing that that's probably not what most frontline staff are referred to as, but do you think that most folks are digging into this level of detail at an intake or at a meeting immediately post intake, or are they getting into these asset-based discussions, or are they sticking to experience-based discussions, skill-based discussions, those sorts of things? Where do you think that's happening, if it's happening?
Or if that was directed to me or for the bigger group?
Anybody.
Okay. For vocational rehabilitation, I think because we are individualized and comprehensive, there is a lot of this initial conversation that happens. I can't speak to the other programs that may not be as individualized and comprehensive as vocational rehabilitation. So that's my experience.
Okay.
Thanks, Tara. So you're seconding what Michael just said.
Hey, Alexis. Alexis, you can go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just piggybacking on what Michael was saying. I mean, I'm as a frontline staff, as I think of myself, working the front desk and having referrals come in, I guess I was trying to just wrap my mind around where in the point were these questions going to get asked for that person to build that what sounds like this paper-based portfolio of all of these sections. So I guess I'm just talking out loud for myself, because for me as a front desk, we do referrals, and they're really quick questions to try to get for vocational rehabilitation. So for us, it's a really quick question about, what they're seeking. And then I guess I was trying to wrap my mind, is that where we're seeing that we want this stuff to be asked, or is this more going to be like intake where you're talking about like our vocational rehabilitation counselors, or like the social worker, or like you're saying the case worker, would be delving more into these questions to develop, because my mind's trying to wrap around. So we want them to develop this portfolio. So who do they start? When they walk into an agency, who's starting their creation of this with them?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just, I have a lot going on in my mind. So I'm just throwing that out there is just in my head and getting it out. So.
No, we appreciate that. Those are all questions that we're going to need to discuss and plan, and that would be part of the piloting strategy and approach. So you're right on track with how you're thinking about it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I know it is a lot, but I think as we dig into the pilot and what that looks like, figuring out the timing, like when do these make sense? When is it valuable to use these, you know, in what context, in what conversations? That's a great point, Alexis. I'm just scanning the chat. There's some great comments. Luisa, I was just reading yours. Thank you. And I think broadly speaking, I don't want to speak for everybody, but in terms of, you know, these other areas that you all are bringing up in your remarks and in your comments in the chat, I think absolutely, like we want to make sure that these are comprehensive, you know, and manageable, right? But we want to make sure that we're including what all should be included. So I think this is exactly the kind of feedback that we really appreciate in terms of things that you think could be added.
One small request, if you all don't mind, these are some really great comments in the chat. For those of you who made those comments, would you all mind popping over to the Jamboard and placing those same comments? Do we have a place, Gretchen, to take comments for the matrix? And so we have them all in one place and we can use that post after this meeting. That would be great.
We do, yeah. If you're in the Jamboard and you're able to do that, you can navigate to slide 15. That's where we're looking for comments on the tool. And if you're able to access the Jamboard, I realize that we have some accessibility issues today. If you're able to access it, if you haven't used Jamboard before, you know, it's just clicking on the sticky tool on the left, adding your comment, and then saving it. So if you'd like to do that, that's great. I think the other thing too, I assume Joe and team that you all will get the chat log from this Zoom, since this is your Zoom. So I think if you can get that to us, we can dig through it there too. But yeah, absolutely. If you'd like posting on the Jamboard, we'd love to see it there too. Thanks, Eric. Does anybody have, you know, sort of jumping back to Michael's point around, you know, in order for this to be used, it really needs to add value. Does anybody have any broad comments about, you know, the extent to which this level of sort of exploration with customers might already be happening, or comments around, you know, how we might think about best aligning this to things that are already taking place?
So I think I would jump in too and just say, you know, one of my cardinal rules in this work is if somebody's developed a tool that works really well, then steal it shamelessly and adapt it. And so in the process of getting your feedback on this tool, if there are other tools that you or your systems have used that have been helpful and informative, that either have some elements that this tool is lacking, or perhaps cover much the same territory, that would also be super useful for you to share with us over the coming weeks. So we will invite that as an opportunity, either to send us a link to a tool that we can look at and kind of jam with, or you know, some specific thoughts about tools that you all like, and we will follow up on that. Just know that this is a starting point and that it could evolve considerably if there are other tools out there that are already in circulation that we can align better to. I do think though that like the general point, when this was sort of made obliquely, is that our system across the system uses many different tools and we don't always have a great line of vision or sight on what each of those tools contains. So if anything, what I'm really quite excited about in this opportunity is at least establishing a baseline, or at least having an alternative tool available to help supplement some existing tools that might be more programmatically relevant, either to the folks that you're serving or to the programs that you administer.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, so, and I think definitely if there's anything that you want to send our way that we can take a look at to strengthen these or figure out how to leverage, we absolutely welcome that. That's great. Well, then why don't we, I'm just looking at the clock here, in the interest of time, I would like to spend just a quick minute taking a look at the discussion questions resource, which also really came out of the conversation that we had in meeting 1. But I want to spend the majority of the remainder of the time that we have really looking at this first draft of the portfolio tool itself. So in terms of the, and again, I think if you're able to expand it a bit, Lori, if you don't mind, in terms of the discussion questions, this really, as we said, this really came out of our conversation in our first meeting, really wanting to foreground, you know, a strengths-based, ability-based, asset and accomplishment-based approach to having conversations with customers. That really was, it really focuses on figuring out, you know, in a really comprehensive way, you know, what are things, for example, that have made customers proud? When did they feel most successful? What key values are most important to them? And so this resource is really intended to be a support for staff to help them kind of dig deeper in their conversations with customers to try to elicit those strengths and assets and accomplishments. And we had a really interesting conversation around some of these areas in our first meeting. So when you take a look at this document, when you have an opportunity to, you know, we're looking at things like, what's the customer's history? You know, what's been their journey? What are their values and beliefs? What do they see as their key strengths and attributes? And what do others see as their key strengths and attributes? What are their preferences? How do they learn? How would they describe their learning style? You know, what key skills do they have? How do they like to learn? And then we have an area on imagining the future. So, you know, sort of what they hope and dream for themselves and as they look ahead. So this is really a conversational tool to support those discussions with customers and with the other tools as well. You know, we're trying to tie this piece in with a self-sufficiency matrix, in with a customer portfolio, and we imagine that it's going to evolve over time, but really trying to capture things that are important from customers' perspectives as a way of really foregrounding what great things they have done or experienced or accomplished. Again, sort of in a different way than a typical kind of deficits or gap-based analysis would be. So I did want to give folks a chance, just if they've had an opportunity to take a look at these questions, if there's anything that jumps out at you in terms of key areas that might be missing or things that you would like to see reflected to support these conversations with customers. And echoing what Eric said earlier, we welcome that feedback over email as well as a follow-up to this meeting. We'd love that. Okay. All right. And so, I think as we've touched upon a little bit, we can take a look at the customer portfolio tool in a moment, but we are trying to figure out, we like in conversations to date, we really like this notion of supporting strength-based discussions. And so we're really trying to reflect that focus in all the pieces for this. And I think that is one of the key questions for us with the draft of the portfolio tool, is how can we make sure we're consistently taking that approach across these various pieces. So why don't we take a quick look and see if folks have questions or feedback around the portfolio tool. And we can try to set it up in terms of where we are. Again, this one is really a first draft, and we know that it needs some additional work. But in trying to initially draft this piece, and again, this is something that ultimately we envision kind of customers could somehow own. It would be a portfolio of their strengths and assets and accomplishments. And we're trying again to capture those areas across a wide variety of topics. And so whatever this tool might ultimately look like, this draft is really focused on the content that might be included. So as you can see, we do have an area around work experiences. So what are key work experiences that customers want to highlight that they have? What are work skills that they feel they have, both technical and also more broad-based? What educational experiences have they had? And not just quote unquote traditional, sort of diploma or degree programs, but we tried to be inclusive here of, have you participated in some sort of learning program at your library? Have you done an online course? Have you gone to your local worksource office and been part of a workshop? Apprenticeship, other kinds of certification. And it goes on. It includes areas around credentials, academic, professional, and other. So those other credentials could include, if folks had experience of having OSHA certifications, or they've done some Red Cross certifications. But really the big chunk of it, and I think this is where we're kind of in draft mode in particular, is on the next page. What we want to really explore with people and have reflected in this tool is their family or personal experiences, and really coming at that from trying to think about what they do in their day-to-day lives for themselves or family members or other loved ones that really does translate into strengths and skills. So do you do budgeting for your family? Do you provide care yourself or arranging care for other folks? Do you provide emotional support for children or elders or others? Do you manage family member schedules? Do you meal plan? This wide range of experiences in families or individually that translates into strengths and assets. So these are the kinds of things that we're ultimately envisioning content-wise might be included in a portfolio for customers. But let me pause there just after that little kind of run through of broadly what we're trying to do here, and see if folks have comments, questions.
Hi, Gretchen, I have a question. So is this going to be used in tandem with the self-sufficiency matrix? Because it seems like, as I just kind of picture, if I had both of these things in front of me, like as I'm asking and talking someone through that matrix, some of these things would come up in those conversations, and you could potentially build a portfolio of strengths based off of the way they've answered some of those questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, Nicole, great question. Yeah, that's what, and that little staff resource piece is attempting to say, like, here's how you might be able to use those, because it certainly seems, to me anyway, if you were doing the self-sufficiency matrix with someone and they were scoring 4s and 5s, those are strengths that you would want reflected in their portfolio, right? And so I think, and when we looked at those two pieces together, and we've made them longer, right? But we want to make sure that there is that connection between that conversation around self-sufficiency and what their portfolio showcases for them. I think you're raising a great question, because the process for that, like, I think we need to figure that out, the mechanics of that, as we think about the pilot. But we absolutely see that those things should be connected. There's a lot in that matrix that would be important, I think, to include here.
Just one other comment, and Nicole, I'm glad you asked that question. This piece is kind of like it's the converse of the action plan. You know, we're all accustomed to, with programs providing services, there's an action plan that says this is the goal and these are the services that this person needs, and we're going to go here, we're going to get this and all of that. And each program is going to continue to develop their action planning tool, however they do that. But then this is the resource, this is the takeaway resource for the customer that highlights those 4s and 5s from the matrix. Because we tend to, even though the assumption here is that even though we tend to, in programs, try to have an asset-based approach, if we end up writing action plans, those come from a filling a gap approach, and that's good, and we want to fill those needs, and meeting needs and addressing challenges is not a problem at all. But how can we also take those strengths and those assets that already exist and put those and give the customer the language that they need to talk about those things in an asset sort of way, and so that they can begin to see, if they need to, that they do come to the table with these assets and that sort of thing. So yes, definite connectivity with the document, but maybe needing to still flesh it out exactly how all of that works.
Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
That my hand made everyone think of accessibility. Follow Eric's lead. In this, I appreciate the comments about what this document is. And this feels like it's that quote unquote electronic passport or whatever, the portfolio that the individual is going to be carrying along with them. And I'd love for it, if that's the case, for this to be a repository for information from the other documents. And this is where we put that. And like you said, to have a section for the self-sufficiency strengths, probably up top. The way it's ordered, where it goes back to that experiential, where'd you work, what'd you do, all that experience rather than the strengths. I think if you flip that, and because we want to focus on the strengths and have a clear template that ties those questions in the other document, all these family questions maybe in the other document as well. Those are the questions to be asking, and then filling it into this here, I think would be helpful. And then the work experience, all the things we always do that are just commonplace, lower.
That's a great recommendation. That's super helpful, Michael, at least to me in terms of my own, just trying to organize, like, what is the best way to tie these things together? That's a great recommendation. Others have comments or suggestions.
Well, I just want to point out, Damiana made a great point in the chat, just value in showing change and showing change over time. I think that's really kind of at the heart of what some of this work is really about, is to help give that customer the ability to see their change and their growth over time. So yeah, that needs to be able to be showcased somehow as an asset.
Mm-hmm.
Great point.
Great comment. Yeah. Other initial thoughts or comments folks want to put in the mix here?
Yeah, I will jump into and say one thing that we discussed as sort of the organizing team when we looked at this tool is it's still pretty darn wordy. We definitely appreciate that. it could probably go through a couple rounds of a more, human-centered design editing check, I think, and that is definitely at the top of our mind. So if you can help us as you go through this in any way, if you see questions that either just aren't that useful or perhaps a little too verbose, we certainly appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, absolutely. We would love your assistance on that. And I think we also talked as a team just about anything that we can do to really align this with that, questions-based model, that's really sort of exploring these areas with folks to identify strengths. We welcome any and all feedback on how to take this into its next iteration. Anybody else have anything they want to add at this point? Again, recognizing that we will welcome your comments after the meeting today. Okay. So I think we can move next into our next steps and what's coming down the pike before our next meeting. But I think just to wrap up, I know we threw a lot at you in terms of all those documents, and we really do appreciate your taking the time to take a look at them and provide us with any and all feedback as we move forward. Anything to strengthen them individually, we certainly welcome, as well as these really great comments on how to tie these different pieces together and ensure that they're mutually supportive would be great. Okay. Thanks, Lori, for bringing up the Jamboard. If you are following along, we're looking at slide 18. So I think what we would like to do, we've been obviously taking notes on what we've heard from you today, and we'll take that back and start to think about how we incorporate that feedback. But between now and our next meeting, which will be in March, we really would love it if you could review these and provide any feedback in the drafts and track changes or add comments and get them back to the team. Joe, should folks send their feedback to you? Would you be the right point person to get those emails?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So any kind of feedback, you can just email it to me, and then I can, we'll be discussing before our next meeting, and we can keep everybody up to date and move forward.
Okay, that sounds great. I think if you're able to, we would love to get your feedback by March 9th, which I believe is next Wednesday. That will give us time to work in your feedback and to reflect it in updates on the documents, so that in advance of our next meeting in March, we'll have revised drafts for you to take a look at. So if you're able to do that, we really would appreciate it. And again, we will be looking at our next meeting in roughly a month. If you want to move on to slide 19. We have been doing 90-minute meetings, and generally our time window, because we're on the East Coast here. Lori and I and Darcy are. Well, Darcy, you're not technically East Coast. You're sort of in the middle. But we've been looking at the 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific range. And we are thinking about either the week of March 21st or 28th. And so what we've been doing is sending out a doodle poll in advance of meetings to figure out what will work best for the most of you. But we did want to say, just thinking about those two chunks of weeks, is either the week of the 21st or the 28th particularly good or bad for folks? I just want to make sure we're avoiding any, other big activities that you all may have going on in that time frame.
Yeah, and if anyone has any preference for dates or anything prior to the doodle poll, let me know either now or by email, just so we can kind of try and tailor that around what works best for folks.
Okay. Okay. All right, great, thanks. So we'll get that poll out so that we can get this on the schedule for roughly a month from now. And then in terms of our next steps on slide 20, just want to let you know that, as I said, we will be taking the feedback that we heard today, Tuesdays and Thursdays only for DSB staff, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Oh, okay, you have monitoring going on. Okay, good to know. Thanks, Michael. That's very time consuming. We will take your feedback and the feedback that you provide over email and reflect that in updated documents that we will get back to you in advance of our next meeting. As I said, we're really, really glad that we have, this team includes folks that are close, very close to work with customers. And so, one thing we would just share with you all as you're thinking about this, feel free to solicit further input from your colleagues who may have helpful feedback that you want to share back with us. We absolutely welcome that. And we will look forward to getting additional feedback from you as you're able, hopefully by March 9th, so that we can turn these pieces back around to you in advance of our next meeting in March. So with that, we just want to say thank you for spending this time with us and looking at all these pieces with us. And I want to turn it back over to Eleni and Eric and Joe for any closing remarks.
I'll just start because I have to hop off to join the interview panel in about 4 minutes. So apologies for that. I just wanted to echo my thanks to all of you. There's been so much just really creative thought, and I've watched this project evolve in directions that I know it never would have gone if it were just me and a couple of other people around the table. That's because already so many of you have brought so many special, great, interesting, impactful things to it. So I think there are a lot of unanswered questions, but I have a lot of excitement about where this is going and its potential. And this has been a great group to work with. So thank you for your time. Eleni?
I'm going to jump in and say ditto. And it's always so hard for me to keep my mouth shut through these conversations, but it was worth it. And to just let this conversation evolve.